There are moments in life when the heart knows the truth long before the mind is ready to accept it. You feel it in the silence after a harsh word, in the emptiness that follows a moment that should have felt full. And yet you stay, you love, not because you're blind, but because your soul is wired to see the good in people, even when they no longer deserve the benefit of your doubt. This isn't a story about weakness. It's a story about strength, the kind that chooses love even in the presence of warning signs, the kind that forgives, that endures, that hopes. But there comes a time when the weight becomes too heavy, when the signs grow louder than your silence, and you can no longer pretend not to hear them. That moment, that awakening, is not your breaking point. It's your beginning. This speech is for the ones who gave too much, stayed too long, and are finally learning that love should never cost you yourself. You knew, but you hoped you knew, you always knew, not in a loud, crashing kind of way, but in the stillness of your mind when the world grew quiet. You saw the way they paused before answering, the way their eyes didn't quite match their words. You noticed the inconsistencies, the strange gaps in affection, the patterns that didn't add up. But still you stayed, not because you were blind, no, far from it, but because your heart saw something your logic couldn't quite destroy. You hoped, you told yourself maybe they were just scared, maybe they needed more time, maybe love, real love, had never touched them properly, and maybe, just maybe, you were sent to be that love. You were the one who could show them the warmth they never received. So you softened, you forgave what others would have run from. You made excuses not because you were naive, but because your empathy had no off switch. Hope can be a gentle poison, can't it? It doesn't hurt you all at once. It whispers over time. It tells you that tomorrow might be different, that the coldness they gave you today will be warmth next week. And in that illusion, you kept giving, kept adjusting, kept bending. You loved them past the warning signs, not because you didn't see them, but because you believed you could outlove the damage, that your consistency would be the cure, that your patience would be the turning point. You saw the cracks, but you believed they were temporary. You believed love could fix them, that your love, unique and pure, could be enough, and that belief, it carried you, but deep down you did know. You felt the exhaustion creep in, even as you smiled. You felt the sadness in your chest, even while convincing others you were okay. You felt the loneliness of being next to someone who never truly saw you. But you stayed, because leaving felt like giving up on the version of them you once glimpsed, the version that only showed up when they wanted something, or when they feared losing control. And still, you gave them the benefit of the doubt, not because they earned it, but because your heart couldn't stop trying. There is no shame in that, no weakness, only proof that you loved deeply, not foolishly. It takes a certain kind of strength to keep believing in someone who doesn't know what to do with your belief. It takes courage to stay when everything inside you is screaming for clarity, but you hoped. And that hope, while it hurt you, also showed the purity of your spirit. You were not wrong for loving. You were just loving someone who didn't know what to do with it. You saw the signs, but you loved them anyway. And that is something only the strongest hearts can ever say. You gave more than they ever earned. There's a certain ache that comes from realizing you were pouring your soul into hands that only knew how to drop it. And yet you gave more than they asked for, more than they appreciated, more than they could even understand, not because they earned that love, but because giving is who you are. You gave kindness when they gave silence. You gave patience when they gave confusion. You gave second chances before they even knew they'd burned the first. There was no scoreboard in your heart. You weren't calculating. You weren't keeping track. You gave because you saw potential, because you saw a glimmer of something good inside them, even if it flickered only for a moment. And you held on to that flicker, believing that with enough light from you, it would grow. But here's the truth. Some people take your light not because they want to grow, but because they like the warmth without the responsibility of maintaining it. They come close not because they value your heart, but because they crave the comfort of being loved without having to reciprocate. You became their safe place while they became your uncertainty. They took the best of you on their worst days and offered you fragments in return. And you accepted those fragments, convincing yourself they were enough. You told yourself love meant sacrifice, that real loyalty meant staying even when the scales were never balanced. The most painful part isn't that they didn't give back. It's that you kept giving anyway, even as your own soul grew tired. You silenced your needs so they could be comfortable. You lowered your standards so they wouldn't feel pressured. You forgave before apologies ever arrived. You told yourself, they're trying, even when there was no evidence of effort. And you did it all with hope that one day they'd see your love for what it truly was, that they'd wake up and realize the depth of what they were being handed. But some people don't wake up, not because they can't, but because they don't want to. Some people are so used to being chased that they forget what it means to stand still and cherish. They get used to your consistency, take it as a given, and then question your absence the moment you start to fade. You gave more than they ever earned, and that doesn't make you foolish, it makes you rare. You stayed kind in a place that tried to make you cold. You stayed loyal in a space that didn't honor loyalty. You loved beyond reason, and in doing so, you proved something not about them, but about you, that your love is powerful, that your heart is unshakable, and though they couldn't rise to meet you, though they didn't value what they held, you can still stand tall in the truth that you gave, fully, authentically, and when the dust settles, that is something they will remember, and something you should never regret. The signs weren't hidden, they were loud, the truth is. The signs weren't subtle. They weren't buried beneath mystery or disguised by complexity. They were loud, clear, sometimes painfully obvious. The tone in their voice when you needed comfort wasn't soft. It was sharp. The way they made you feel like a burden when you were simply being human, that wasn't hidden. That was loud. The forgotten calls, the selective kindness, the love that came only when you were useful, these things didn't sneak past you. You saw them, you felt them, not once, not twice, but repeatedly. And still, you loved them. Still, you found ways to explain the inexcusable. You turned neglect into their just going through something. You turned emotional absence into their not used to expressing feelings. You rewrote the story every time they failed to show up. Not because you didn't know what was happening, but because your love tried to give them another chance to be better. Sometimes love makes us storytellers. We rewrite the script, soften the villains, give the ending a glow it never truly earned. And we do it not because we're blind, but because we want so badly for the story to turn out well. You weren't blind. You weren't ignoring the signs. You were transforming them. You were giving them a meaning that allowed you to keep holding on. You didn't miss the silence after your vulnerability, you just convinced yourself they needed time. You didn't miss the way they smiled more around others than they did with you, you just convinced yourself they were tired. Every signal was there, every red flag waving, but you stood in the storm, hands open, heart exposed, believing that love would be enough to quiet the winds. That's the painful part of loving deeply. It sometimes means betraying yourself slowly. It means seeing what's in front of you and choosing, again and again, to believe in the potential rather than the pattern. You saw the signs, you just didn't want them to be true, because admitting they were real would mean facing the heartbreak you weren't ready to accept. It would mean letting go of a version of them that only existed in your hope. And so you stayed, you tolerated, you waited, you excused. You loved them louder than they ever deserved, hoping your love would drown out the noise of their indifference. But now you're beginning to hear things differently. You're starting to realize that love doesn't silence warning bells. It doesn't mute your instincts. You're seeing that the signs weren't just loud, they were the truth speaking to you over and over. And though you loved them anyway, that love wasn't weakness. It was bravery. It was resilience. It was proof that your heart still chose connection, even in a space that offered none. But now you know. You know that love isn't supposed to be earned by enduring harm. It's supposed to feel safe, reciprocal, alive. The signs were loud, and now, so is your awakening. Love isn't meant to destroy you. There comes a moment quiet, almost sacred, when you sit with the weight of everything you've endured and ask yourself a single, heartbreaking question. Was that really love? Because real love, the kind that heals, the kind that builds, the kind we dream about, it's not supposed to feel like you're constantly falling apart. It's not meant to make you doubt your worth. Yet somewhere along the way, you were taught that love comes with suffering. That devotion is proven by how much pain you can endure without breaking. And so you stayed. You stayed in the confusion, in the cold silences, in the spaces where your laughter grew quieter and your light dimmed. Not because you were weak, but because you believed that real love is about sacrifice, that letting go would be failure, that staying was strength. You told yourself, this is what love looks like when it's real. Messy, complicated, demanding, but the truth is, love isn't meant to destroy you. It's not meant to hollow you out just to prove you're whole. You gave up pieces of yourself one by one, your peace, your boundaries, your voice. Slowly, quietly, almost without noticing, you started adjusting who you were to become who they needed. You silenced your needs to protect their comfort. You began walking on eggshells in your own home, whispering your truth just to avoid their storm. And when they didn't notice, when they didn't care, you tried harder, loved harder, as if giving more of yourself would finally unlock their heart. But it never did. And with every act of self-abandonment, you lost a little more of the person you used to be. There's a cruel irony in it that the very love you thought would complete you was the thing unraveling you, and they watched. Maybe not with intention, but with indifference. And sometimes that's worse. Not being actively hurt, but being quietly undone by someone who simply doesn't see your soul. You stood beside them, loyal, devoted, quietly hoping they'd look up and realize the beauty of what they had. But they never did, because they were never listening with the same heart you were speaking from. And still you loved, not because they were lovable, but because your love didn't know how to give halfway. But now you're starting to remember yourself, not the version of you they tolerated, but the version that used to laugh freely, that used to sleep peacefully, that used to know what it meant to be held with care. You're realizing love should feel like home, not like exile, that real love doesn't require you to shrink, to beg, or to ache. It invites you to grow, it lifts, it calms, and anything less, no matter how deep the history, no matter how strong the attachment, isn't love. It's survival, and you were never born just to survive. You saw the signs, you loved them anyway, but now you love yourself enough to let go. You're waking up now, and that's beautiful. There's something profoundly beautiful about the moment you begin to wake up, not from sleep, but from the spell of believing you had to earn love by losing yourself. It doesn't happen all at once. It's not dramatic. It's subtle, almost quiet. It begins when you no longer flinch at their silence, when their absence starts to feel like peace, not punishment, when you stop rereading their messages trying to find hidden meaning. It's when you realize you haven't cried in a few days, that your smile, though small, came from somewhere real. You're waking up now, slowly, gently, and it's the most courageous thing you've ever done. Because waking up means facing the truth you spent so long avoiding, that they were never going to change, that their love was a mirror not of who you were, but of what they lacked. And despite all of that, you loved them anyway. But now, something inside you is shifting. You no longer carry guilt for asking to be seen. You no longer call it love when it feels like exhaustion. You no longer confuse chaos for passion or distance for mystery. You're beginning to understand that what you called love was often hope wrapped in desperation. You gave so much of yourself, thinking they'd finally meet you halfway. but they never did. And you kept waiting, giving, compromising until you looked around and realized you didn't recognize yourself anymore. That version of you, the one who tolerated everything just to keep something alive, that version is tired. And she's allowed to be, because now in the stillness you're meeting someone else, the version of you who sees clearly, who no longer romanticizes red flags, who no longer mistakes crumbs for a feast. You're not bitter, you're not angry, you're simply awake. And with that awakening comes clarity. The kind that doesn't seek revenge but peace. The kind that doesn't need validation but truth. You don't hate them. You just finally understand what they were and, more importantly, what they were not. They were not your healer, not your mirror, not your forever. They were a lesson dressed as love. A reflection of who you used to be, someone willing to bend until they broke. But not anymore. Now you speak differently, you walk differently, you protect your peace like it's sacred because it is. You're no longer looking for someone to complete you, you're simply returning to yourself. And that is the most powerful love story of all, the one where you come home to your own heart. So yes, you saw the signs, you loved them anyway, and that wasn't a mistake. It was a chapter, a necessary one. But the chapter is closing now, and what comes next is yours to write, awake, whole, unapologetically free.